Hand sanitizer no fe bi feye. Man jam kwe. Elishia not lefe.
Well, and that's Kofi Kinata with coronavirus, of course. That would take us into our next conversation shortly here on the Super Morning Show. But look, do more with Absa Digital Banking in a flash. Now, you can make free instant money transfers, free mobile money transfers, up to 100 Ghana cedis daily, pay bills, buy airtime, make payments with your Absa Vertical card, and also make cash deposits on our ATM. Enjoy convenient banking as you stay safe with your loved ones. Remember to sanitize or wash your hands after the use of any e-banking device. Absa cares, stay safe. For inquiries, visit absa.com.gh. Terms and conditions apply. So we're getting into our conversation about coronavirus, and this morning we're looking at handling or management of COVID-19. In the past, there's been lots of complaints about how we were not, testing more people, how we had departed from everything that we started in the past that, worked for us, resulting in Ghana being commended all over the world. This morning, I've been joined by Dr. John Amoisi, who is a lecturer, Global Health Department, School of Public Health, KNUST, and leader, Global Health and Infectious Disease Research Group at the Kumasi Center for Collaborative Research in Tropical Medicine. We've also been joined by Dr. William Ni Ayite Menson, who is a public health specialist and fellow for Health and Equity Center for Social Justice. Dr. Amoisi, good morning, and Dr. Menson, good morning. Thank you all for joining us.
Good morning, Winston.
Great. Good morning, and thanks for having me.
Great. So let me start off with you, Dr. Amoisi. In the past, there were a lot of concerns about our handling of COVID-19. Now, in this year, there's been lots of cases, lots of death, about 200 persons dying as a result. What is your assessment of our handling of COVID-19 currently?
No, thanks for that question, and I'll say good morning to all your listeners all over. I think it's a sobering question when we reflect on where we've come with COVID-19. It's been a long road, and it's hard to see the end. You could look at different things to assess how well otherwise we've done with this disease. So I'll just try and pick on a few points and impress on a few issues, hopefully, that will help us to put things in perspective. I think what's most striking about the disease today is how we see this astronomical increase in the numbers of deaths. I think it's less so the number of people who are getting infected and more about the number of people who are dying. And this is, for me, the most disturbing phenomenon that we're witnessing, not only in our country, but also across the entire continent. So I would like us to focus more on what we should be doing right now than what we should have done and what we could have done, because the facts remain that as November, December last year, we got the impression that we were almost out of the woods. The deaths were hardly any deaths being recorded at all. The rate, whatever it was so low. But today we see a difference. Now, what I want to point out critically is the fact that our data collection has been under par. Now, when I say it's been under par, what I mean is that not enough data has been collected. And whatever we have is not of good enough quality.
When you say not enough data has been collected, what sort of data were you expecting to be collected that hasn't been collected, hence that conclusion?
I will emphasize, in a pandemic like this, what you want to do is to be able to measure a couple of things. One is your rate of infection or the rate of spread of infection. You want to measure your rate of hospitalization or hospital utilization. And then you want to measure also your death rate as accurately as possible. You can go beyond that also and measure the levels to which people have been exposed, because that has implications for how you go about rolling out your vaccination program. Let's step back a bit and talk about the infection rate. The infection rate will help you to know how quickly the disease is spreading. It's not for nothing that in countries like the UK, the US, and other places, we kept hearing about the R naught, the R naught, the R naught. It is not just something that is put out there as being too technical. It is such a critical number that informs every decision that is taken around what we're doing to prevent the spread of the disease. Now, to measure this, or to be able to ascertain this figure, you need to be able to, on a regular basis, be testing people in the general population and be checking what the positivity rate among those you're testing is. This gives you a clear idea of how quickly or otherwise the disease is spreading. It helps you to measure changes over time and helps you to even crudely assess the impact of whatever interventions you put in place. What we have is the test results of people who report to the hospital either because they are sick or because they are concerned they may have been exposed, or they are worried, or they have the opportunity to take a test. This is not good enough. It does not tell you the real picture. Let me just give you an example. Look at the numbers we have for Ghana, both in terms of the numbers of deaths, the numbers of infections, the number of tests, the number of deaths. Compare with countries like Burkina Faso, or Mali, or Niger, or Central African Republic. Would you sincerely like to think that Ghana is in a worse off position than these countries, which have had so few deaths and so little infections? My country like Tanzania says they have no infections at all. So if you juxtapose the number of tests against the numbers of positives and number of deaths, you see a clear correlation. You're only as good as your eyesight is. And
Okay.
this pandemic, our eyesight to help us navigate out of trouble is our testing regime and our data collection and data analysis regime. So the data we're collecting is essentially hospital-based or facility-based data. And I always give this example to my students. I'm based in Kumasi, so if I take figures from the Konfo-Anokye Teaching Hospital for any disease, would those figures be representative of, let's say, the Edum or Greater Kumasi area? Obviously not, because Konfo-Anokye would receive patients all the way from the northern part of Ghana, the Brong-Ahafo region, and even from Cote d'Ivoire and from Burkina Faso. So those figures from Konfo-Anokye would be most likely an overestimate of what the reality is in Kumasi. In the same way, if I should go to, say, some district, let's say Asimfosu, where we've got some research ongoing, and I take the hospital data there, would it be a real reflection of the disease burden in the Asin area? Obviously not, because there's so many towns and villages that are right in there, deep in the forest, which cases don't report to Asimfosu Hospital.
Okay.
So those hospital data, that data is not reflective of the community. If you want to know the real figure, you go out there, you measure systematically over a period of time. This is the only way you can tell the reality. And just yesterday in The Guardian, there was a great article pointing out, using clear pieces of evidence, how within Africa, and this is not just Ghana alone, and let me put it out there, that Ghana is doing much, much better than several other countries, but it's still not good enough. Let me just put that out there. The data is so lacking that it's very hard to make any useful projections regarding the needs of vaccines and the kinds of interventions that can be made. I would plead that we make serious investments in our data collection mechanisms, data analysis mechanisms. This is the only way that we can make serious decisions.
I'll get back to you,
about
Dr.
what-
Amosi. Yes, I'll get back to you, but let me get to Dr. Mensah, because talking about data and talking about, doing the right things and not just focusing on those who meet the case definition. Dr. Mensah, evidence from the Ghana Health Service indicates that, about 58.6% of the tests are due to contact tracing. Isn't that an indication that we're doing well compared to, the 65% of tests that were done at the airports about 6 weeks ago?
Well, thank you very much, Winston. Good morning to my fellow panelists. Good morning to your listeners. It does not necessarily indicate that we are doing well. And I need to start by pointing out that the quality of decisions we make concerning this fight against COVID-19 relies largely on the quality of data that we get. I would want to support Dr. Amoisi's point on, the lack of testing, the fact that most of the testing done is skewed in a particular direction, either to people who are very sick or people who actually take the initiative to test themselves. And I would still refer to that Guardian article he mentioned. In some countries, people who dig graves will tell you that even though their countries report not too many deaths from COVID-19, now they've had to do maybe 3x the number of graves that they dig every day. And also there were some post-mortem tests on some dead bodies in another African country. I'm not sure, it's probably Zambia. And then SARS-CoV-2 was found in these not previously diagnosed folks, which indicates that they very likely may have died from this condition. Personally, I have had a number of friends pass out, not reported as COVID-19, but then a Guardian will probably tell you that this guy decided to go out and get some orange because he was unable to taste. The next morning, he told us he couldn't breathe. By the evening, he was dead. And you hear many of these stories, as anecdotal as they might seem. They do point in a certain direction that we are not doing the right thing. And like somebody said in a very popular TV series, chaos is a ladder. And this is not necessarily the time to beat ourselves up. But then COVID-19 has really given us an opportunity to develop the kind of data systems and invest in reaping information that will help us make good decisions. And in future, who knows if there's another pandemic, say another decade from now, these systems that we have invested in will help us handle those pandemics better. I will not try to impugn the integrity of whoever is gathering the data for Ghana. I would like to believe that the GA.
Hello, Dr. Manson. Well, technology
is doing that, but then all of us have huge reason to believe, that the numbers as reported to us are heavily undercounted. And if we continue on this trajectory.
Well, again, connectivity issues, we'll work it again, but let me get
it can only get worse.
Sure, but talking about the numbers, Dr. Manson, finally on this, you say you've had friends who have died, and now these friends who died, were their deaths related to COVID and still went unreported as a COVID-related death?
Well, no COVID deaths, no COVID tests were done on these people, but then given the symptomatology that people close to them described to me, I might have reason to believe it might be COVID.
Are you by this then suggesting that there are persons who may have died through COVID-19 and yet their deaths went unreported as COVID-19 related death because no testings were done?
Absolutely, I am sure. And it's also because of one of the policies we have here of not doing post-mortem diagnosis of COVID-19. It probably makes us live in, for want of a better expression, a fool's paradise, where we see ourselves as performing better than we really are. And so I believe that we are sitting on a ticking time bomb, and this trajectory will not end as well unless those with the power to make the decisions, invest a little more brain power and a little more, investment, into capturing the kind of information that we so badly need.
Okay, let me get to you, Kwame. And Kwame, in the past weeks we've been having this conversation. We talked always about how, we're testing persons who met the case definition. Now we're moving away and we're contact tracing. I mean, isn't that an indication that we're departing from the old ways which we believed were not the best to the older ways which we got commended for when we were contact tracing and doing the right things?
Well, thanks, and good morning to both panelists. I'd want to backtrack and go to what John said a lot earlier, that your decisions are as robust as your data. That is the summary of what Dr. John Amoisi was saying. So, yes, you can say in one breath that now you've gone back to the contact tracing, you've gone back to more in-country testing compared with what was going on at Kotoka International Airport, and therefore things have improved. and you wouldn't be far from wrong. But the question is, what have you missed in between? And how is that informing your decisions going forward? Secondly, how much does this enforced, and I use the word advisedly, enforced contact tracing? Because without that contact tracing, we would have been overrun based on how our numbers were going in the beginning of January. So we have been forced to change strategy. How much is that enforced contact tracing informing the extent of community spread we have? Because you have to look at contact tracing and the way it goes, that the person who tests positive, probably because they met the case definition, become the index case, and their contacts are then traced, and then the contacts of those contacts, if they test positive, are traced. If you are looking at epidemiology, they'll tell you something is the number of generations of infections and the generational time, the time between the first infection and the next person getting infected. If by any unfortunate circumstances you lose the trail of the contact, then you get into the situation where Dr. Amoesi was talking about. For example, if someone traveled into the hinterland in somewhere in Nasim Fosu and was positive and was at contact, you couldn't find them. They go and infect people in the villages, and then those people do not come to the hospitals to then become an index routine surveillance case for whose contacts you can trace and sit in the rural areas, use herbs and other things, and pass away. Then you go into the situation where Dr. Manison was describing, where the person might die symptomatically, which you can suspect is COVID, but you have no means of adding it to your data. And when that happens, what it then means is that your data is skewed. And in epidemiology and in pandemics, the unfortunate thing is that you are like a historian. You look at your past to try and predict your future. And therefore, if your past is smart and skewed, your future is bleak. And that is why, like Dr. Amoesi was saying, some of us back in April, May, were going on about collecting the data on reproductive number, not just the R0, but the effective reproductive number, because as you put in modalities to try and fight the pandemic, the reproductive number will change, which is an artificial reproductive number, but it also gives you an indication of how the disease is either decreasing or increasing in the country. So if the reproductive number is deviating further away from 1, then you know your community spread is larger. If it's deviating further closer or below 1, then it's smaller. So we need to have these things. We need to know what our generational time is, because that would inform whether we are having super spreader events. It's good enough to tell me that, yes, there are super spreader events happening in workplaces and all that. That's fine, information. But how quickly does someone get the information, go into their workplace and cause a super spreader event? That gives you an indication of how the disease spreads from one generation to the next. All this information is missing. And that is why I would agree totally with Dr. John Amoesi that our data is just not good enough. And some of us have been saying it, and part of the reason why we got slated was because we went down this tangent. But I would also go with Dr. John Amoesi and say, we are where we are, and we have to learn as historians from the history of this data and see how we can build those data sets as quickly as possible. How, for example, we can make the disconnect between what's happening in Komfo-Anokye and it not being representative of what's happening in Kumasi, because you have to remember that Komfo-Anokye, for example, is a referral hospital, it's a tertiary hospital. So the people who probably would go there would be those who are very, very unwell. How do you then relate it to what's going on in, say, Kumasi South or Meisha Polyclinic or in Edum? How much of that community spread are you then picking up? So it is good to the numbers I see. I wouldn't deny that, because when I see in-country testing going to about 89, 90% of our general testing, I'm fascinated. But I'm also interested in the skews therein in this testing and how it impacts on our ability to control the pandemic. And if you want to know how this impacts, you need to go back to another thing John said about the deaths. Look, deaths are part of what we call the public health pandemic domino effect. Infections happen, some would fall sick, some would remain asymptomatic. But if you look at the current strains, it's about 70% remaining asymptomatic, 30% getting some level of sickness. Then some will get severely and critically ill, and unfortunately, some will die. If you look at the beginning of January, we're having on average about 1 death a day. It went to 4 deaths a day. Then it doubled to 8 deaths a day. Now we are in the realm of 11 deaths a day. That should tell you that the same dynamics is happening in your infection rates and is happening in your critical and severely ill people. This is just public health arithmetic. It's got nothing to do with epidemiology. It's public health arithmetic, like light follows day. And we need to own up to it.
Okay, I'll get back to you because you make a point about what we may have missed and how that would impact our decision making. But Dr. John Amoisi, I see you shaking your head. What's it with our numbers that gets you shaking your head?
No, I am passionate about this, and I'm very happy that Kwame has nailed home this point. And some of us will not shy away from calling for better data, because this is really our eyes out of the pandemic, and this is so clear. If we don't get this right, we will continue getting into trouble. And I really don't want us to be comparing ourselves to what's happening in other parts of the continent, because it's terrible in other parts of the continent. But we need to look at ourselves as a country. Compare with what's going on in, say, Israel, which is just one big laboratory of a country. Exciting results came out of Israel yesterday regarding how the Pfizer vaccine is working there. I mean, this is by far, to me, the largest community trial that has ever been conducted in the world. And so amazing, you got literally the same percentage effectiveness, or I should call it effectiveness, when they conducted the normal clinical trials. And that should tell you that this stuff works. And if we would invest heavily in our data collection systems, and then in the translation of this data into policy making, I tell you, we'll be in a good place pretty soon. It's going to take some investment and some real dedication to doing this and doing it right. I think in Ghana, we have the money enough to do this. We've certainly got the brains to be able to do it. We've got some great people in the Ghana Health Service, in the Ministry of Health, great people leading the COVID-19 task force with swaths of experience. Our own Dr. Samwaba was the deputy director of the WHO. He knows this stuff, So let's just empower them. Let's get that data, even make it available to some of us academics, independent people, to crunch the numbers and to provide the information. Another thing we should be doing, especially with our data, beyond collecting information on the rate of spread and the deaths and so on, is also, and I've been hammering this, information on the seroprevalence. Now, this is so important because it is going to inform how we roll out the vaccines. We're realizing that when you have antibodies, they don't stay forever. It's not clear exactly how long they stay for, because there's people who had COVID as far back as May, April last year. They've been tested for antibodies today. They don't have even any sign of having ever been infected. It means they don't have antibodies anymore. There is evidence that people have been infected and been reinfected and even died. Now, this should tell you that being able to measure in some way possible the number of people who have been exposed and informing how we roll out the vaccination, how many we should order, how we should give it out, over what period, how many we should order, and in how many tranches is so critical. These vaccines are expensive, and you want to be able to apply them with pinpoint precision so you get the best bang for the buck. So I cannot emphasize more and more. That's why I was so animated when Kwame was speaking, because he was just nailing it. And this is what we really need to do. And I tell you, we've got the men and women in Ghana to be able to do this, right from the Ghana Health Service, Ministry of Health, academia. Just give us the power and we'll deliver.
Talking about vaccines, so we're told we have a 3-phase strategy. In the first phase, we're looking at vaccinating about 20 million people. We're looking at 20 million doses. Then we get into the second and the third and final phase. Now we're looking at June 2021 to have about 19.5 million doses of vaccines coming into the country. Let's look at that timeline. Would you say, based on how
Right.
fast COVID is spreading,
Right.
that timeline is the best in dealing with COVID-19 cases?
Right. No, that's a great question. Let me put it this way. It was not a bad timeline, but with what we're seeing today, I think that we may need to revise that plan a bit if we can. And again, I'm not so much into the dynamics of the vaccine acquisition, aside what I know we're getting from COVAX. But with the vaccination, it is really about the speed. If you really want to get the best bang for the buck, it's about the speed. We've seen the exponential increase in the death rate, and Kwame talked about this. Dr. Benson also talked about this. For me, this is the most alarming part. It signals a change in strategy. As the virus changes, we cannot maintain the same strategy and just say, oh, this is the plan we had on paper, so that's what we're going to follow. You change your battle strategy as you see the enemy changing, and the virus is the enemy. The speed of vaccination is going to be perhaps the biggest game changer, not just the vaccines themselves. Why do I say the speed of vaccination? One, because the newer strains we're seeing are leading to three things: increase in transmissibility, that means it can spread faster, increase in severity of disease, and thirdly, a possible decrease in the effectiveness of the vaccine. What does this mean? The longer you take to vaccinate, the more the time the virus has to mutate. What you want to do is to get ahead of the virus and short circuit it so that it cannot spread so fast as to be able to mutate. You want to vaccinate faster than it can mutate. So it's not just about getting the vaccines now, it's about how quickly you're able to deploy them. Now, with the volumes we have and the schedule we have, we're not going to get to vaccinating 70% of our population till about September, from my estimation. That, unfortunately, will not cut it. It may have cut it if we have these plans maybe in December, January, but with what we're seeing today, we need to find some means, some way of doing it faster. And then when we do this, the next thing is to take a second look at our border, tightening the borders and the screening facilities there. Because once you short circuit, what you want to do is also tighten the entry points so that you're able to catch as many as possible, even down to the minutest who are coming in. And that's what countries like the UK are doing. Certainly that's what Israel and others are doing. For me, the speed of vaccination, tightening of our screening at the borders is the way to go. But the speed is perhaps the most important.
I hope we have Kwame with us still. Hello, good morning, Kwame. This is Kojo. You talked about what you call pandemic arithmetic, and I mean, I wonder if we can do a little bit of pandemic arithmetic together. So our understanding is that the government is going to spend something like $3 per dose on these vaccines. So to vaccinate the whole nation, if that was the target, it would cost us $3 times 2 times 30 million. That's about $180 million to vaccinate the whole country. For something as deadly as COVID-19, you would think $180 million to vaccinate the whole nation is not that much money. We've spent more on, less important things. So, in spite of that, the president's target is that we will have 20 million doses by the end of June. So this speaks not to the cost of it, but to the availability of it. It is that difficult to get vaccines. So with that in mind, when we talk about the importance of speed, how fast do we have to get this vaccine into the country in order for it to be useful, regardless of how much we're spending on it? At what point will it be far too late for us to be vaccinating people with the AstraZeneca or the COVAX vaccine, which we know is not effective against some of the strains? At what point will it be too late?
Kojo, thank you. The thing is that the government's 20 million is grounded in science at the moment, and I'll explain what that means. And that is part of the arithmetic. At the moment, all the vaccines available globally are not licensed for under 16 years of age. currently there's a large study going on in the UK for use between 6 and 16 years of the AstraZeneca vaccine. I know there's a study going on in South Africa also for juveniles using Novavax and also Johnson & Johnson. So in terms of availability, you don't have any vaccines available for below 16 years. And therefore, if it has to be used, it has to be used what we call on an off-license or informed consent basis. So if you look at our population dynamics, about approximately 10.3 million of our 31.3 million population are below the age of 16. So they don't qualify under the current dispensation for vaccination. That gives us a problem. And that, you see, sometimes you look at the arithmetic and you are like, there are positives and negatives to this arithmetic. It gives us a problem because the herd immunity threshold, assuming even the reproductive number remained at 3, is about 75%. With the new strains, which are 50 to 70% more virulent, it goes to about, 80, 85%. But with the vaccines licensed, we can go as most to 66, 67%. So that is a crucial number in the arithmetic. Then going to this 66, 67% has to be at speed, because the thing about viruses is that their speed of mutation is unpredictable. I've said that. One thing I've become scared when it comes to this virus is the speed with which it might mutate around its spike protein. At the moment, there are about 800 different strains, of which some are very insignificant. We know about 4 or 5 significant strains as we speak now, and those are the ones causing the concern. Because we are not sequencing significantly in Africa, and Ghana is no exclusion, we don't even know if there are strains of significance popping up in our countries, but we are not picking up on. Which then means that we cannot make an informed consent decision about the effectiveness of these vaccines if we don't move at significant speed. And I'll give you a definition of the speed. For UK, and let's start with the Israeli data, where hospitalization has come down by about 70, 80%, infection rates have gone down by almost 90% and all that. Their rate of vaccination was about 3.5% of their population a week. The UK, as at yesterday, had done 15 million plus vaccinations, which equated, since they started vaccination, 1.5 million vaccines a week. That has brought hospitalization down by about 27%. But even then, it is expected that that is going to increase significantly. If you look at what Dr. Amoisi was saying, and our trajectory is to get to 20 million doses in June, which means that then with logistics and other things, probably to get the 20 million doses into arms by September, that means that we are inoculating only 10 million of our population by September, which is only 30% of our population. And which then means that you have 70% of your population as a susceptible population because of how the wild exposure, antibodies do not last, and the extent of the immunity, T-cell training and other things is unknown. So you've got that 70% who then become a susceptible population within which variants can happen, within which you can have strains that might not be so susceptible to the vaccines and all that. So when you have all these variables which are unknown, because I cannot put a number on them, and I don't think any of my colleagues on the panel can put a number on them, or even any immunologist at the minute can put a number on them. The best thing you do is to say, I'm going to go for broke and I'm going to go at speed. For example, today, UK is even saying, after celebrating yesterday 15 million and 90% of the at-risk population being immunized, are saying they are going to go for broke and are aiming for 2.5 million doses a week. And aiming that within the next 5 weeks, they should have got to 60% of the population. These are numbers that we should be looking at and thinking about how strategically we can mimic. And don't forget, we are making a basic assumption here that everybody offered a vaccine among the top 10 million is going to take it. with disinformation and vaccine hesitancy, we are not even sure. So if our education doesn't go on appropriately as well, this might even stretch beyond the September, which is the conservative estimate John is making. So the arithmetic looks a bit tricky, but it's not beyond us to streamline the arithmetic, get it right, and hit it right. Because the rate limiting step of all this is the vaccine. And once we have the vaccine, everything else can be put in place.
That's interesting. So you make the point that none of these vaccines have been tested for people under the age of 16. But we're trying to get herd immunity. Okay, in Ghana, you've pointed out that about 35% of our population is under 16. So that's 35% of us that we cannot vaccinate.
Yes, about 35%. I mean,
right.
You need to look at Ghana's population from a point of view that, unlike other developed populations, the percentage of our population over the age of 65 years is 3.1%. The bulk of our population is between 15 and 64 years, with the larger chunk being the young ones, which are 0 to 15 years, who are growing. Those don't qualify for vaccination unless the studies that are going on are concluded.
That's the point I'm getting to. So in Ghana, between 35% are under the age of 16. Around the world, about 30% of the world's population is under 16. So does that mean that with our current vaccines, herd immunity is actually impossible?
No, it doesn't mean that. That is something that has been identified. You need to bear in mind, I always go to this simple adage of, he who pays the piper calls the tune. The country which invested most into vaccine technology was the UK. And the UK has an elderly population. So their emphasis to get to herd immunity calculation, their arithmetic was based on the fact that they can easily get 75% of the population from 15 to 90, 100 years, because they've got lots of people in 100 years. So that was their focus. And that is one of the things I advocated for, and the likes of John advocated for when all these started, that we need to be part of this vaccine development. Because if we had, all these population dynamics would have played their hands at a much earlier age, and we would have given what I call biological substrates, which are human beings, within those age cohorts for which we could have tested the vaccines on. And we wouldn't have been confronted with these problems. You see, sometimes we need to call a spade a spade. When we take decisions that are short-sighted and think that, we will not be guinea pigs, we will not be this, and we forget that the first strain of the virus that came disproportionately didn't wreak havoc on younger people compared with this newer strain, and we felt that our mortalities were much lower and we're getting away with it, you get yourself into this fox pass where reality stares you in the face, and the practicality of achieving herd immunity still relies on the people who pay the piper. Because now the trials for the under 16s are happening in the UK as well. So what's your contribution to the body of knowledge and science that would drive us out of this pandemic? You are just sitting down, being a bystander, at best sitting on the fence, and then expecting manna to drop from heaven. Right. Unfortunately, science doesn't work that way. It works by some of us being guinea pigs. And I always pride myself in saying I was one.
Mr. Ayite, thank you for that, Kwame. Dr. Ayite Mensah, I'm interested in this whole conversation about vitamin C and zinc. CNN's recent reporting indicated that they don't have much of an impact on handling the symptoms of COVID-19, and that they are not really useful beyond their ability to perhaps promote a healthy immune system in healthy people. So what does that mean for people like us here in Ghana, whose doctors have been prescribing that we stay on zinc and vitamin C, and the messaging behind the purpose of this medication, for which reason some people think they have a certain amount of extra protection because they are taking zinc and vitamin C. Should we now start changing the conversation? Should we start changing the communication? And what should it be?
Well, thank you so much, Kojo. Well, the conclusion is pretty simple. vitamin C and zinc do not protect you from getting COVID-19. I believe a number of our doctors and good friends who advised us to start taking vitamin C may have done that with the best of intentions. But then it was also probably because we were still learning about COVID-19. We are still learning about it, and for the next few years, we'll continue to learn a number of things about this rather strange disease. And so I think that the best vaccine, right, speaking hypothetically, before the actual vaccines get in, will be for us to look at some structural interventions, both on the demand and supply side, to protect us until such a time that these vaccines get in and we are able to, vaccinate the required number of people to achieve herd immunity. You have raised concerns, and Kwame brilliantly talked about our population structure, with a huge proportion of us being below the age where we become eligible for vaccines. This is because in the development of the vaccines and coming up with these policies, those who did it decided to do it to protect themselves. And these other countries have older populations. And so even if they decide not to immunize anybody below the age of 15, they might have a good chance of getting herd immunity. But for us, it's a little different. And I would use this opportunity to make a few suggestions, right? Because I know your platform is one that's widely listened to. And these suggestions would both be on the demand and supply side. Government has tried to do its best, but one thing that I see is seriously lacking as far as government strategy is concerned is a lack of a sensible community engagement strategy and a lack of, using a leverage of existing community structures to get the message out to people. COVID-19 and its vaccine are not like others because this disease itself has been characterized by so much mis and disinformation, such that even before you hear about the vaccine, there's a tendency you want to say you won't take it because you've listened to some fringe elements on YouTube or elsewhere. But then let's government come up with this strategy. Which pillars in our society do people listen to? Because whether we want to accept it or not, a huge chunk of our population do not necessarily trust the government. We look at institutions like our traditional leaders, religious leaders, civil society organizations, some other groups of people that folks listen to. Will it make sense one, apart from the general sensitization we do for the public, engage these folks, cultivate very strong allies who will then be champions for getting, folks to listen to the things that government says. Currently, we are on a certain terrible trajectory where day in, day out, the number of people who pass out, within a 24-hour period probably doubles, right? How many of us would not be infected with COVID-19 by June when these vaccines come in? How many of us would not have lost loved ones by that time? And so between now and when the vaccines come in, we would have to ensure that folks trust the information that government is sending. And part of it has got to do with the people who are directly talking to the people who should listen to us. Unfortunately, large parts of our communities happen to be densely populated. Our social architecture exposes us to a lot more people than maybe folks in some other parts of the world. Take a look at public transportation, take a look at our markets and other things. It's impossible to do any meaningful contact tracing when I get up every day and spend my time from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. sitting in a market, interacting with thousands of people. And so before the vaccine comes, we would have to think and we would have to work, apart from all the other brilliant suggestions that have come up, to ensure that people do the things that, they actually need to, so that there would actually be enough of us who are healthy enough to get the vaccine when it finally arrives in June.
Right.
And I know you asked about vitamin C and zinc, but I'm also very passionate about this and
understood.
put some of these points across.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Dr. Amwesi, let me bring you in on this, because while vitamin C and zinc are being debunked, we're now hearing that the University of Barcelona has done some research indicating that vitamin D could cut the risk of death from COVID-19 by 60%, according to new research which was published by The Telegraph and Wales Online just yesterday. Okay, so apparently about 10% of patients admitted to a certain hospital in Barcelona died within 30 days, but just 6.5% of those treated with an intensive dose of vitamin D, known as calcifedol, died. So they're looking at something like a 60% chance of cutting down the risk of death because of vitamin D. How are we to take all of this new research as it stumbles over each other into the public domain?
Okay, I think you asked a great question. The research is really fascinating, especially those of us who play there, if I'll put it that way. And we're living in unprecedented times when research is so proximal to decisions being made, and it's just changing our lives on literally a daily basis. Now, the thing about vitamin D is, well, you can put it this way: we've got enough of that in our part of the world, so we should say hooray. But it needs to be looked at in context, all right? And there's a good article that was published in the Lancet in January, which is titled "Vitamin D and COVID-19: Why the Controversy?" And this really speaks to what really goes into the administration of vitamin D and how it actually works in order to have a positive effect on people. So I wouldn't, rush to say, okay, now vitamin D is the new thing which everybody should be taking, and then we will get about 60% protection from COVID. All right. It is a vitamin. It is a vitamin that is abundant in our part of the world on account of the sunlight that we are exposed to. Of course, there's a huge debate about vitamin C regarding various arguments for and against it. The COVID-19 has only taken that discussion to a whole new level. Issues about vitamin D deficiency causing rickets and all these things. We've known this for a while. So what I would say is these kinds of findings need to be subjected to clinical trials. The information we have for now are what we call information coming from observational studies. Observational studies are great. It was observational studies that first of all pointed out to us that lung cancer is a direct result of smoking, for example. So there's a place for observational studies. But in the times in which we are, observational studies do not cut it. Observational studies are what brought the idea of chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, being a game changer. The initial evidence suggested very strongly that this was making a difference. Even for vitamin C and for zinc, it was observational studies that suggested that these could be a game changer. When these were subjected to clinical trials, we realized that it was not so. And then from the clinical trials, you can even move into community trials. And this is why I was telling you that I was so excited about the findings from Israel regarding the of effectiveness as what was done in the clinical trials, in those community trials. This for me is really almost unprecedented because it's such a strong correlation. So coming back to vitamin C, great news, it's encouraging. It shouldn't be that now we all rush to take vitamin D. We've got enough of that anyway in our part of the world. We should move to clinical trials. And the question is, I'm going to go to what Kwame was touching on. What are we contributing by working ourselves? Are we conducting it ourselves? I know that colleagues right here at KNUST are doing a clinical trial of a herbal preparation from the Mampong Center for Plant Medicine, which is great. This is the kind of thing that we should be promoting. The anecdotal evidence, the observational studies are good, but they honestly will not cut it. You realize that for mask wearing, this was a huge debate. There was anecdotal evidence out there. It was subjected to serious trials, and trials are not limited to drugs and vaccines. Interventions also can be used, can employ a trial design. This was subjected to clear trials, albeit community trials, and the evidence was clear that the masks work. So the next step we should take is to subject these to trial. We have enough vitamin D in our country, even in terms of tablets. We know how to design clinical trials. We can conduct them. Why would we not want to invest in that if indeed it's worth it? Vitamin D is cheap. Conducting these trials is not too difficult. We could look at this. For example, course, a bit more complicated to launch trials, but we could do this. So all I'm calling for is for us to be scouring the evidence and do our best to contribute to trials as much as we can. I think us connecting with some of these developers, manufacturers, both of the drugs and of the vaccines, at this stage, even though we're quite late, is what we should be doing. This virus is mutating. Some of the interventions, drugs and vaccines, which may be effective today, may not be effective tomorrow. The way you get ahead of the curve is by being available to conduct trials, both of these drugs, the vaccines and diagnostics. We need as a country to begin to set up these bilateral relationships, these direct communications with manufacturers, with developers, and avail ourselves. Israel has done this. I wouldn't like to think the government of Israel doesn't care about their people or are not smart enough, but they saw this early. No country in the world was able to see that, look, this is the opportunity. We avail the whole country as a huge trialing ground. And look at the gains that they are reaping today. Of course, there is an element of risk, but in a pandemic like this, you surely would like to take a calculated risk, which will end up well for you. We saw the UK take a calculated risk that did not end up well when they started going for herd immunity the natural way. They realized it was not working when they were monitoring the figures. They did a quick U-turn, have made the right decisions. Now they're ahead of the game.
Okay.
I think we should do the same. And the decision to avail ourselves for trials, clinical trials of drugs, vaccines, and diagnostics, I think is a major decision which needs to be taken at the top and taken very quickly.
Great. Let me just hear from you, Kwame, your thoughts on the usage of vitamin C, and then we probably might talk about steaming, another thing that people have suggested could go a long way in helping a fight against COVID-19. Kwame.
Thanks. I wouldn't want to add too much on to what Dr. Madison and Dr. Amoisi have said, because the bottom line is, unless we begin to publish evidential information based on robust research, we would always be looking at observational trials and speculating. And for me, that is pseudoscience. It is good, but it is pseudoscience. And therefore, to add on, there are certain things that are known basic about vitamin C and zinc and vitamin D. Both of them have a role to play in immune stabilization and a healthy immune system. These are things that have been well researched, and that is what informed the decisions around these things at the outset of this pandemic. In fact, some people even suggested immune boosters. But later research is showing that if you go boosting your immune system, because this tends to cause a hypersensitivity reaction, you probably might be leading yourself closer to your grave than you are to saving yourself. So all these things are information that is coming out based on robust science and people understanding what's causing the cytokine storm, the D-dimer spike, and all those technical things that, like John said, some of us who want to play with these things, we go and look at it and say, what is it telling me? So this then brings me to steaming.
Yes.
Because that, again, is an observational thing. Steaming has been with us and predates probably any of us sitting on this panel. One thing is known. Even if you go to the university teaching hospital, and I think I sent somebody, I forgot who it was, actual protocol of case management from the Oxford Royal Infirmary Teaching Hospital. And it clearly says that they use steam inhalation, but it is not used as a preventative. Steam is used to help liquefy the mucus so that it can be expectorated out. Because one of the things of this virus is that it causes fluid accumulation in the lungs. That decreases the volume of the lungs and the ability of the lungs to store air, and therefore for the what we call the alveoli to then exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide, and therefore allow your body's red blood cells to bind with this oxygen and circulate it around the body. That is why people then struggle to breathe. So if you're steaming and assuming that there are no secondary infections in the lungs that are causing atypical pneumonias here and there and all that, then the person can cough out the phlegm and therefore improve the circulation. So it is actually shown and is being used widely in many hospitals as part of their treatment protocols. The point is that we are doing it as a preventative. And let me be honest with you, none of those aromatherapies, whether it's azadirachtin, which comes from the neem tree, or eucalyptus oil or azadirachta have been shown anywhere to have antiviral properties. As a pharmaceutical scientist, I would put my head on the line and tell anyone to show me any data. As a biomedical scientist, if I take my other hat on and put the new one on, I would hold anyone to show me anywhere where there's a trend analysis that has shown any form of steam inhalation to actually prevent people from getting a viral infection. Because if you look at this virus, the temperatures required to kill it, assuming you had an exposure, are so high that if you took that in the lungs, you probably would scald yourself. If you pour that on your hands, you'd scald yourself. And that is why later it was shown that hand washing, you didn't actually even need warm water. You actually needed proper soap and doing it properly, because the temperature you needed, you burn yourself in the long run.
Okay.
So these are things, and that is why I keep saying that in all this, whether it comes to vaccine hesitancy, anything, we need to have the evidence to combat the pseudoscience. That is the only way. And sometimes, don't get me wrong, the pseudoscience is grounded in facts and previous evidence, like I've said about vitamin C and D. But when it's gone into clinical trials, it realizes that it doesn't translate from what is theoretically taught to what is practically experienced. And that is why the Israeli study makes all of us excited, because that transformation has been clearly demonstrated to the point that now, yesterday I was watching a documentary from Israel, and their vaccination centers are empty. Now they are virtually trying to beg the ultra-Orthodox and the young ones to take the vaccines so that they can also have a juvenile trial.
Okay.
But they are not taking it because no one is falling ill. We can do the same too.
We can do the same too. Kindly hold on. We'll come back. We'll talk about whether or not we should stick to our Orthodox way of treating, or maybe resort to homeopathy, the traditional way of doing things. Stay with us. This is the Super Morning Show on Joy 99.7 FM. We'll be right back.
Super Morning Show.
What would you do if you have the choice to do anything in life? Build your dream house, take very good care of your family, and plan for a comfortable retirement. Plan a befitting funeral for your loved ones when they depart. How would you live if you knew there was a friend waiting to support you on all of your life's choices?
You have such a friend in Glyco Life Insurance. Glyco Life has all the plans to meet your life's needs: your child's education, your life savings, your mortgage, funerals, redundancy, and your retirement, and takes the burden off your shoulders. So go ahead and live life to the fullest today with Glyco Life Insurance plans. And remember that all our policies are hedged against inflation. Talk to Glyco Life on 0302 218 500 or 246 142. Also visit our website at www.glycolife.com or any of our branches nationwide for more information.
Glycolife, we cushion you for life.
Glyco, we cushion you for life.
Charlie, so it's actually raining and we can't hear any sound. As for this, your house, when it's raining, no sound. When the sun is up, the interior is cool. What roof are you using?
They use Ico roofing shingles from Interface Limited. Long lasting and beautiful.
Ico roofing shingles. We all for move to Interface and get this Ico roofing shingles.
Interface Limited is the leading supplier and installer of finishing input materials for the building and construction industry in Ghana. Call us on 0274 999999 or visit our website at
www.interfacelimited.net. Facebook Interface Limited GH. Instagram interface.limited.
You be Go TV Lite, Value or Plus subscriber? Time it roll, so be unlock it to me. I want with TV no more. Upgrade the Go TV Max in the year. Nenyano at a discounted price, 60 Ghana cedis per. You will enjoy over 50 local and international channels for less. No darling cry. Local series, telenovelas, blockbusters, sports, any kids channels pop baby. Make you stay connected via my Go TV app and any pay-body agent near you. Now enjoy maximum entertainment with Go TV Max for less. Offer day from 14th January to 31st March 2021. T&C supply. Go TV. Love it.
Coffee in your cup and Joy on the set. The Super Morning Show is always the best bet on Joy 99.7 FM.
You also came by the amount of $150. Thank you, Honorable Chair. Honorable Chair, it will be very difficult for me to answer this particular question.
Were there evidence of under-declaration?
And my answer is not that I was aware of.
Come again?
Not that I was aware of.
Not that you...
I was aware of.
Tell me the contract arrangement with Frontier.
Have you seen it?
I am saying, tell me the contract arrangement with Frontier.
Okay, the point is that I have not seen the details in the contract.
I was not consulted. However, what I know, and I wasn't consulted with regards to how much is charged at the airports.
Are you aware that the company Frontiers Healthcare Services Limited was only incorporated on 21st July 2020? Are you aware?
I would say I'm not aware.
Ghana is very grateful to you.
All right, so welcome back, and thank you very much for staying with us here on the Super Morning Show on Joy 99.7 FM. So shortly we'll be dealing with the issue of allopathic or homeopathic treatment, and we'll get the explanation, we'll get the clarification on all these two, whether we want to go for the conventional medicine or alternative medicine.
Allopathic and homeopathic. I'm not aware of that. Anyway, the doctors are here. They'll educate us on which one is best. In the meantime, though, look, as always, MTN wants you to experience the safest and most secure way of enjoying MTN Momo. And that is why, from the 2nd of April, you will be required to present a valid national ID anytime you visit a Momo agent to perform a transaction. Please note, this is to help you so that you can keep receiving and handling cash and your transactions in a safe and secure way. That is why we're good together. Just Momo it everywhere you go. Thanks for all of your text messages. We'll be sharing a few shortly. And they're brought to you by Glyco Critical Illness Plan. GSIP, it's in your best interest to survive.
Well, and talking about COVID-19, and we're having a conversation about COVID-19, yeah, some prevention tips. Avoid touching your face because you can get a virus on your hands from touching surfaces like doorknobs, laptops, and cell phones. Also avoid touching your mouth, nose, and eyes or biting your fingernails to prevent the virus from getting into your body. Do not shake hands and hug people, at least for now. And do not share personal items. Cover your mouth and nose when you cough and sneeze. So we still have Dr. Mensah, Dr. Mwesi, and Kwame Sapon-Siedu here with us. And I'm getting to you, Dr. Mensah. So there's been a conversation whether on the best form of treating COVID-19 patient. Do we stick to the conventional medicine as we know it, or maybe try alternative medicine? And in that case, homeopathy. Okay. Yes, Dr.
Comment, ask ourselves, what is the end goal of the treatment? So, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. So if you could start all over again, yes.
Sure. So to answer this question, I will just start from this very hypothetical question. What is the end goal of the treatment? First of all, the goal of the treatment is, to reduce morbidity and mortality, right? Is to keep folks healthy. And I would like to stick with the evidence. As we speak for treatments, right, the CDC has approved a number of such treatments that do not necessarily kill the virus, but then support you to either survive it or reduce the impact of the virus on you. And currently, for the treatments that are out, they can be categorized into 4 main segments. These 4 include 1, slowing the virus. The second is reducing and overriding the body's immune. So to go through each of these, when it comes to slowing the virus, that's where we use antiviral medicines in general. So with this, we have a very example named remdesivir. And this is I don't know, you may have seen some rather exciting bills on social media from some hospitals in the Ghana Health Service with some very expensive drugs. And so what this particular drug does is that it slows, the multiplication of this virus, and it's through the multiplication of this virus that, a number of the symptoms manifest. And the second group would be the groups that reduce an overactive immune system. And these include, drugs like dexamethasone, which is a steroid of your body in fighting this invader. Because this excitement to fight this invader might end up hurting, aspects of your own body and then your own functioning. And so once it does this, your symptomatology doesn't deteriorate as fast, and you are able to function normally over a good period. The third category has got to do with the category that treats complications. And COVID-19 has been proven to be able to damage multiple organ systems, including, there's some evidence that it has an impact on our blood vessels, our kidneys, our brains, and caused multiple other complications. And so traditional medications that protect these organs might actually be prescribed for you if your provider feels that you might be jumping into one of these complications. And then the last category that I talk about, supporting the body's immune system. There are ongoing trials that currently use plasma from patients who have recovered from COVID-19, because these ones contain antibodies to the virus. And this category functions similarly, but a little more weakly than the vaccines actually do. And so once you get this, it's a thought, right, that your system would now be able to recognize and fight more effectively against the virus. And quickly to talk about alternative treatments like herbal, as well as homeopathy, and then some others, I would still want to stick with the evidence. And, there's a laid down procedure for telling people that, this medication actually is safe, that taking it in XYZ doses will protect you, and then it's efficacious against the organism that we are fighting. And so,
Dr. Menson, let's work on your line.
Evidence, right? Hopefully.
Okay.
Am I breaking up?
Yes, you're breaking up, so we'll come back to you
Okay.
shortly. Yes, let's try and work on the connectivity. But in the meantime, let me get to Dr. Amoesi. Your thoughts on this particular question, Dr. Amoesi.
No, I think it's a really important question. And as Dr. Menson already mentioned, it's important that we look at the evidence. I think allopathic medicine is a great thing. And I can tell you that here in Africa, we are not even, quote unquote, the greatest proponents of allopathic medicine. If you go to the Indian subcontinent, Ayurveda is the most widely known allopathic medicine regime that has dominated the world. You can go to the Asian or Southeast Asian continent and look at China and Chinese traditional medicine. You can go back, way back into the ages, and allopathic medicine has been with us forever. It's helped in many ways, it's killed in many ways. But if you look, the greatest changes that have taken place in the world with regard to improving our life expectancy and quality of life have been made via allopathic medicine and not homeopathic medicine. Sorry, I mixed up the two in the beginning. The allopathic is your orthodox or orthodox medicine. Your homeopathic is your home medicine, if I put it that way, or your herbal kind of stuff. Look at medicines like penicillin, for example, massive game changer, 1928, Alexander Fleming. Look at aspirin. Look at Viagra. Has there been any homeopathic medicine that has had such an impact like Viagra? Look at the birth control pill. Look at Lipitor. Look at insulin. For me, insulin is one of the most impressive. When I used to practice as a doctor, just giving insulin, and the effect that had immediately on someone was just phenomenal. Think about Thorazine and psychiatric disorders, and so many others, AZT, Ritalin. There's a swathe of orthodox medicines, allopathic medicines that have been massive game changers, all right? Many of these, of course, were derived from herbal preparations or from herbal sources, and some were also synthesized in the lab, or some of these were derived from natural sources and then were sort of improved to be absorbed a lot easier in lower doses and so to have more effect. Think about chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. You get quinine from the cinchona plant, and then you actually synthesize it better, and you can get something like hydroxychloroquine. You need lower doses, it's much faster acting, better effects. So I don't want to really make a massive distinction between allopathic or orthodox medicine and homeopathic medicine, but it's important that whatever be the case, we pursue the evidence. The evidence is on the rates of recoveries, on the quality of life, on the clearance of the parasite or the virus or whatever. They are clearly laid down indices. The unfortunate thing is that there's so much anecdotal evidence, so much of, oh, my brother, my sister, my family members, and that kind of stuff. That evidence does not cut it. And unfortunately, when a lot of this is subjected to clinical trials or closely scrutinized, it fails the test of scrutiny. This is not a problem for Ghana alone. It's a problem all over the world. Yesterday, I was just reading something interesting that came across my desk about lobotomies, where back in the day, people used to sort of, I just put it in layman's terms, tickle the brain a bit with a needle as a way of curing psychiatric disorders. This was practiced widely in the UK, widely in the US, and thought to be effective until it was studied carefully and found to be a complete waste. And yet it was done by doctors over a long period of time.
Okay.
So I can see Kwame smiling. But it's just to tell you that we need to pursue the clinical evidence and go with that.
And based on that smile,
medicine, but we must subject to evidence. If it's good evidence, we go with it.
Based on that smile, I'll get to Kwame for, I mean, you have the final say on all of this, Kwame.
You see, we're dealing with a virus that is not here to joke. It's a virus that is here to actually cause a lot of damage. If anyone is listening, we all know that now long COVID and post-COVID is real. The disease burden that is bringing is such that our health system is even not clued and catered well enough to deal with it. So it would be naive if we decide to go with untried remedies in an effort to fight something as lethal as this. So homeopathy, yes, has a historical antecedent, but even the science of homeopathy, which I sometimes challenge, because the basic principle is to give a small dose of something that otherwise in high doses would give you the symptoms of the disease in a way that it predisposes you. So homeopathy, if you want to read about homeopathy and you go to the historical antecedents, it was embedded in the concept of vaccination and immunization. So you introduce someone to a small dose of a virus or something, as was happening in Ankara and Constantinople in those ages, and then came to England and became the genesis of immunization, which has brought us here as a science and is helping us fight this pandemic. I don't think we should go back to the antecedents, which has now evolved into science to find an answer. And that was why I was laughing. It's like telling us to go back 350 years to try and find a solution to something that is taking us ahead of our time. Look, we have used what easily happened in a decade, and we have found it in a year. That is how quickly this virus has gotten us to behave. And suddenly people are telling us to go back 350 years. Do you know what that's going to do? That means it's going to take us about 1,000 years to get a handle on some of these things. We cannot be that naive. The truth of the matter is, we need, even if we have antecedents from homeopathy in our country, we need to subject it to science, like my colleagues in Faculty of Pharmacology, Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology are doing, the likes of John are doing in our Sinful Way and all that. That is what we need to do. That would give us an understanding of the virus we're playing with and an understanding of how to combat it locally. That is what we've not done, and that is why we're so shortchanged when it comes to vaccines. And that was why when John was talking, I was laughing, because we seem not to even learn. We don't even seem to realize that we shot ourselves in the foot with some of these anecdotes, and we didn't get involved in the science that has brought us to vaccination. Now, population architecture doesn't even allow us to achieve herd immunity unless someone else does more trials for us. We cannot always be cap in hand. And that is what I would want to end by saying.
Well, thank you very, very much, Kwame, for joining us. Thank you very much, Kwame Sapon-Asiedu, who is a pharmacist and a fellow of CDD Ghana based in the UK. Thank you very much, Dr. William Nia-Itemenson, a public health specialist and fellow for health and equity at Center for Social Justice. And thank you also, Dr. John Amoisi, lecturer, Global Health Department, School of Public Health at KNUST, and leader, Global Health and Infectious Disease Research Group at Kumasi Center for Collaborative Research in Tropical Medicine, KCCR. Well, it has been an exciting conversation, very insightful, and we've learned lots of things. So I'm sure as we leave here, we'll know that it's better to prevent COVID-19. For me, that's the most important thing. In all of it, prevention is better. That'll be all from us this morning here on the Super Morning Show. My name is Winston. I've been here with Kojo Yankson on behalf of the team led by Samir Dami, Nimwa Inim Ado, DJ Wobeti, and the rest of the crew. Thank you so much for being part of us. At 10 a.m., we cross over to the Supreme Court for the ruling on the motion by the petitioners in the election petition case to reopen their case. But we hand you over to DJ Wobeti.